Thank you. The most important issue facing Canada and Canadians is how we deal with the Indigenous issue. It was a decade ago that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed. And how we as Canadians and as a Canadian society react to its roadmap of 94 recommendations is going to determine who we are as a country, what kinds of principles we have, and what kind of DNA we leave for future generations. Universities were implicated in the TRC's recommendations in many levels, in terms of accessibility and financial support, curriculum, language training, resources in the library and archives, and in governance arrangements in general as to how to run a post-TRC university. To its credit, Universities Canada, of which I was a member of the board at the time, responded to the TRC recommendations in June 2015 with a set of 13 principles that set up a roadmap for Canadian universities to pursue the TRC recommendations. These varied all over the map, from curriculum changes, creating welcoming spaces for our Indigenous students, changing signage and a variety of cultural activities on campus, ensuring a sort of proper training, maybe mandatory Indigenous courses for the professions, and generally initiating a series of activities to ensure a dialogue between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Now, how individual universities pursue these 13 principles and react to the TRC is going to be up to them, and we'll see. But I believe that the Maple League universities have a particular tradition and a particular DNA that lend themselves to responding positively and successfully to these challenges, and indeed to providing leadership for all of the universities in Canada. At the same time, as a caveat, I believe that there's something in the way that we operate as an institution, as institutions, in our governance and policy processes that may undermine these efforts, and I'll come back to them at the end. So what is it about the Maple League universities that makes them amenable to being successful in responding to these challenges? Well, I think it's because they are well positioned to deal with the 7 R's of the post-TRC world. Just happens to be that my name is Robert. 7 R's. The first R is respect. There is no way forward in the post-TRC world unless people and institutions develop a deep and profound respect for the Aboriginal community, for its history, for its suffering, for its pains, but also for what it's offered to the rest of the country, to Canadians. Without internalizing this value system, it's all going to be lip service. I think Maple League universities are a place of respect and a place of understanding and a place where people come together that have given opportunity to be opened up to new ideas and new cultures and traditions, that people have a good and fighting chance to gain this sort of respect and to internalize this value system. The second R is responsibility. Everyone in Canada and in our communities and our universities is going to have to take personal responsibility for the situation as it is. There is no saying, oh, that was our ancestors that did that 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 25 years ago, or 10 years ago, or yesterday. We are all implicated in this. After all, it's our governments that perpetuate this mess. It's our families that have contributed to some of the horrible things that we see around the world, whether it's youth suicide or drug addiction, lack of fresh water and reserves, and what have you. We have to accept responsibility for this situation. I've been around small universities like the Maple League for my entire adult life. I believe that it's in places like the Maple League universities that people confront situations in the world, and that if it's explained to them, opened up to them in an experiential and other way, that they will take personal responsibility for this, and they will ask the question, what do I do about this? And they're going to say, I'm going to do something about this situation. Third R is reflection. I think that when we look at the past and try to internalize the value system, a bit of two-eyed thinking, when we look around and see what we're responsible for, we have to reflect on what the hell are we going to do about this mess? How are we going to participate in it? And the biggest danger in this situation is to give up because it just looks so complicated and impossible. So that's where reflection comes in, and that's what universities are very, very good at, particularly Maple Leaf universities, because we create a space for people to reflect, to talk, to discuss, to argue, to internalize, and to come up with solutions. So reflection is a very, very positive feature of the Maple Leaf schools. The fourth R is resilience. This is not going to be an easy passage. Some of the things that one confronts in this world are pretty awful, are just very, very, very hard to confront and to digest and to accept as part of our own country and be responsible for. And that's going to take a kind of mental and spiritual resilience. And we're going to argue. There's going to be different ways of approaching this. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be a lot of me too, you too finger pointing in all of this. There's going to be failures as we go forward. But we cannot let failures and difficulties get in the way of moving forward. I believe that Maple Leaf universities are fantastic incubators of resilience, both individually, because that's what we encourage our students to do, to take chances, to fall, to get yourself up, to try again, to try again, to try again, but also our institutions themselves. We've all been around nearly 200 years with little boats that shouldn't be able to float. There is no good business model for a Maple Leaf University, believe me. We do the impossible. And I think that that's what we also have to do here, is as institutions develop a resiliency to deal with this issue. The fifth issue, the fifth R, is reciprocity. This is at the heart of going forward. This is what really reconciliation is about. On one level, for you accounting students, all that, we know what reconciliation is when we do the accounts, right? We balance the books. We balance the ledger. Well, we have a big metaphorical ledger balancing to do here. And we owe a lot. And we owe a lot because we've been given a lot. And we've been given a lot under duress in many cases. And so we owe to give a lot back. And so reciprocity, the principle of reciprocity, is going to have to inform everything that we do when we make decisions. Because a lot of times this looks like zero-sum games. And we know that on our ledger we owe a lot. Well, I think that, from my experience, reciprocity is at the heart of the Maple Leaf experience. Everyone's giving to each other. Everyone understands that it is better to give than to take, and that makes the institution better. And everybody understands the necessity of paying it forward. And indeed, our universities are built upon that very reciprocity and generosity of philanthropy. Without the generosity of people and the giving back of people, this university, all our universities simply wouldn't exist, would not be able to function. So we have to bring that spirit of reciprocity, which we've developed, and it's part of, I believe, part of our DNA in Maple Leaf universities, to this issue of reconciliation. Number 6 is responsibility for the long term. This is something that's not going to take place in one school year, or in 2 school years, or in one cycle of 4 years of students. We're talking 7 generations, right? We're talking 7 generations. And so someone earlier talked about les petits pas, the baby steps. Yes, each one of the baby steps is important, but you got to remember, it is a long series of baby steps, and that turns into quality and what have you. And people often get discouraged about thinking about something that can't be done instantaneously. There's no app for this. There's no quick solution for this and what have you. But I think Maple Leaf universities inculcate that kind of perspective of understanding of the long term. Yes, we understand we want to do something and we want to do it now, we want to take it off, et cetera, but we also know that some things are the long arc of civilization, if I may put it that way, that take time over a period of time. And what we have to do is make sure that we don't quit along the way, and that once we start, Once we make that commitment, once we stand up like this, naked in front of an audience and say we're committed to this, you're in this for the long term. Because if we don't succeed, it's going to be soul destroying. And it's going to kill our relationship with Indigenous communities. But I think we've been around a long time with the universities that shouldn't exist in a certain kind of way in terms of rationalization and technology and modernization. We've all been around 150 to 200 years. We understand the long term. And I think we have the capacity within ourselves to understand that long term in terms of this particular issue. The seventh R is the R for resources. All of this is going to take stuff, is going to take doing. It's going to take people, it's going to take policies, it's going to take programs, it's going to take budget money. That's just the way it is. It's going to require a commitment of people and budgets to move this going forward. And again, people say, well, geez, what can we do? We're small and we're little universities and what have you. But I think that actually Maple League universities are much far better placed for dealing with the resource issue than bigger and so-called richer universities. Partially because we have a tradition of being what might be called nimble alchemists. We are very, very nimble in being able to bring change quickly, to develop unique policies, to innovate because of our size, because of our immersive qualities, because of the fact that we can get 6 people, go down the corridor, have a drink or a cup of coffee and come back with the solution. We can do that, we're nimble. And we have to take that nimbleness and apply it to perhaps slightly more complex problems. And in terms of money, well, you know, I've been at this racket for over 30 years now. I still don't quite understand how I do it, but there's an alchemy to do this. And we've learned this alchemy in Maple League universities. We just do stuff with very, very, very little because we're very efficient, we're imaginative, we're innovative, we make stuff out of nothing. Plus, we're very, very good to going out to the community and finding people to guiltily give us money. And we have to draw on that as well, too. So those are the 7 things we got to do. Now, the resource picture also involves a change in our governance. And indeed, the commitment to do these sorts of things has to be done in a different way, or it's not going to get done. So each of our institutions is going to have to develop what I call alternative governance structures. We're going to need a process parallel to our senates and our board of governors. It will have to be an Aboriginal Indigenous council. It might be joint with people on the campus, with people in the community, people nationally or what have you, and that group has to have authority. It's got to have authority to get the money. It's got to have authority to set the agenda for us. Which brings me to my caveat about Maple League universities. I've been around this game for 30, 40 years now and what have you. And we have a capacity to eat ourselves up, if I may put it that way. We have a capacity to be too hard on ourselves. And that goes to something that was talked about a little bit earlier. The greatest example of the best being the enemy of the good, the rise and fall of the Weimar Republic. It was referred to earlier today. The best constitution that was ever written. Absolutely the best by the greatest minds and what have you. 20 years later, we had Hitler. Now, one of my heroes, Joseph Schumpeter, great Austrian-born economist at Harvard, he had a front row seat for all of that. And he wrote a great book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And in it, he developed a theory of democracy that looked to the problem of democracies being overloaded and collapsing under their own weight. And there's 3 principles we have to worry about as we pursue this big, big, big agenda. Number 1, don't overload the agenda. Have a big agenda, but don't overload it. In universities, man, we want a lot of things. We want to solve everything, and we want to solve it now. And the truth is, we can do anything we want, but we just can't do everything at one time. So we have to construct an agenda that is manageable going forward, or else we create huge disappointments and despair. Number 2, we have to develop a sense of self-discipline in ourselves and what we're doing, both for leaders like me, who shouldn't get up and promise the world that we're going to solve everything tomorrow, because that leads to disappointments and leads to the undermining of authority, and also from the population. Has to understand that it's got to be self-disciplined in terms of not overloading the agenda, because overloading that agenda leads to chaos, leads to extremism, and very often leads to disillusionment and despondency. And lastly, like Schumpeter said, you need a well-trained bureaucracy, a well-trained management structure of experts that are protected from the vagaries of day-to-day politics. Because it's the experts and the managers and the staff, the great staff in institutions like this, that develop good policy, that do good analysis, and deliver the goods. So we set the agenda, we let the managers manage, and let the people who know what they're doing do what they know, and then we get on with the game. So 7 R's, 3 restrictions, 7 plus 3 equals 10. That seems to be a nice round number. Thank you very much.